Hey, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident um, culture warrior. I don't know, person who bitches about rings of power. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well. I hope whatever is going on in your world, it is a beautiful, lovely day, and you are having a beautiful, lovely time of it. That sounds nice and friendly, right? Anyway, all right. So sometimes I've seen some comments where some people are like, "Hey, you need to move on from this whole rings of power thing and stuff like that." Or people will ask me like, "Well, why do you search out some of these articles that you end up finding, and then sort of rip them to shreds, or so on and so forth?" And there's a reason for it, and like I've said, I've mentioned over several videos, is because knowing how the media industry works and stuff like that, how things are sort of planned and laid out, and sort of the groundwork gets laid for certain things, so that you can spin back around to them later when you need to. And one of the reasons why I tend to search out these articles, like the Game Rant articles and other articles, is because eventually what they will do is they will start to spin a narrative around the show. And I'm not talking about the ones that you saw coming out of Amazon when the show, leading up to season 1 of the show of Rings of Power, and during it, the whole, oh, the fans who question why there's a black dwarf, well, you must be a racist. You question, well, is Arondir the only black elf? Are there other black elves? Oh, you must be a racist. So they're going to try and build this narrative. Part of building this narrative, right, and sort of trying to cement the Rings of Power as the de facto most accurate, up-to-date version of Tolkien's world. Part of that is, as I've mentioned previously, is one, attacking the fans who question it. Two is attacking the Peter Jackson films, because that's the, by default, point of reference that a lot of fans come at them with. Okay, and so they need to tear down Peter Jackson's films, which is why you've seen articles saying, "Oh, Peter Jackson took liberties with this, and Peter Jackson's films didn't age well, and here's some issues, and women weren't as dominant as they should have been in Peter Jackson's movies." Is because they need to tear it down, because they know that you guys, the fans, will use that as a point of reference against Rings of Power. So we have to tear that down. And then, of course, finally, the third thing is Tolkien himself, and attacking him as racist and misogynist and outdated and so on and so forth. But anyway, I wanted to highlight something. So this is an article it's actually just from earlier today. It's actually from I'm recording this on Sunday evening, and this article is from just a couple of hours ago. So by the time you guys are seeing this, it's going to be Monday. So this was from yesterday, okay, for you guys. But basically it says, Galadriel's famous quote decoded the hidden message you never noticed, right? And I think we all know where he's going with this, or where the author is going with this, and says Galadriel did not have that much screen time in Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings movies, but nonetheless, she got some memorable scenes, none more so than her face-to-face meeting with Frodo, where she faces the temptation of the One Ring, briefly taking on a fearsome green glow of an evil tyrant and turning into what fans call drowned Galadriel, or thermonuclear Galadriel, before overcoming it and speaking her most famous line, "I passed the test, I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel." Until recently, the most obvious and only common interpretation of that phrase took the test as a literal thing, which she has passed as opposed to failing, when she rejected the ring and did not surrender to her darkest desires. And here's the crucial part. But since the release of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 1, we also have an alternate interpretation of that phrase readily available. Galadriel's character in The Rings of Power is much criticized. To be precise, she is objectively portrayed as a very flawed person, and one's opinion of the show is highly dependent on whether you believe that this portrayal is intentional and Galadriel's flaws are meant as something she must overcome, or whether you believe that the showrunners partially or wholly failed to recognize what sort of character they're presenting to us. I think it's both, to be honest with you. I think they failed to recognize what makes Galadriel in the sense of Tolkien's works, and Peter Jackson's adaptation, but I also think that they don't give a shit, and they wanted to give us a, flawed Galadriel so she could have a story arc, because apparently they couldn't come up with anything on their own, based on Tolkien's writings, because, that doesn't sell. Anyway, one of her chief flaws is her bullheaded conviction that she must accomplish everything in general, and her lifelong quest of destroying Sauron in particular, by herself. She is blindly unreasonable in her pursuit of Sauron, to the point when she would rather strand herself right in the middle of the ocean rather than to leave Middle-earth and her enemy behind. In the light of this, her phrase in the Fellowship of the Ring suddenly takes another meaning. She passes the test in the sense of passing the task of finally defeating Sauron for good to someone else, right after Providence seemingly delivers the surefire method of doing so into her hands, and agrees that she must finally go into the West, something that she has rejected so strongly before. Thus she manages to overcome her ancient obsession and finally admits to her own failings and imperfection, which blinded her to Sauron's schemes before. All right, and this is by Aaron Gimenez. Okay, and as you can see, this is earlier today, my time when I'm recording this, but this will have been yesterday for you guys. Okay? Now, where have we heard this argument before? Well, we heard this argument before in this article that we ripped into, okay, by our bestest of buddies, Alice Rose Dodds, when she talked about the exact same thing. As a matter of fact, the last quote here, I believe, comes directly from this article here. Yeah, I believe it's, yeah. So, okay, I don't know where he's getting the quotes. He's sort of, okay, paraphrasing. All right, so the point I'm trying to make here is that this is why I do this. This is why I call this stuff out. This is why I have a channel where, even though season 1 has long since been in the books now for, several weeks, why I still find these articles and call them out for the complete and utter bullshit that they are. And that's why, is because this narrative will get picked up and spread around to the point where it becomes the default narrative. So now what you're seeing, and I just showed you, is that scene in Peter Jackson's films, and to some degree, for some people in the books, will now, in some people's minds, be referenced through Rings of Power, okay? Thereby changing the meaning and changing what Tolkien was trying to do when he wrote it, okay? What Peter Jackson was trying to show when he filmed it, okay? Now they'll say, oh, yeah, but, you have to watch Rings of Power season 1 to actually understand what, what that scene really means, because that's what, and people who don't know any better will fall into that, okay? And like you'll see, one person puts it out there, and before you know it, several other quote-unquote journalists, media journalists, will put it out there, and it will become the de facto position for interpreting those scenes and interpreting that part of the book and interpreting that part of the movie. And, I don't think that that's okay. So my channel, whether people like it or not, whether people, agree with it or not, I'll call that bullshit out, because that is, this whole idea that Galadriel's like, oh, I passed the test, insofar as I'm passing this on to you, Frodo. I'm passing the test to you, okay? No, absolutely not. That is not what Tolkien intended. That is not what Tolkien wrote, and that is not what Peter Jackson put in the films. You guys are literally just trying to draw connections to that shit Amazon TV show, and make connections to Tolkien's work and to Peter Jackson's. And in reality, other than character names or location, other than names in general, okay, whether it's you're calling it the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. Other than the names, there's no connection because you're not sticking to the story as Tolkien wrote it, and you know that. And so this whole idea of trying to connect this show in some loose, roundabout, half-assed interpretation, or interpretive way, and try and link it to arguably the best film adaptation of a book, at least in my lifetime, Peter Jackson's films, or to Tolkien's books directly. I'm sorry. I'll push back on it. If nobody else wants to push back on it, I'll stand up for the fans. I'll push back on it. I don't give a shit, because that's just crap. And so the reason why I call these articles out is because you see this. You'll see it start to spread. First, it was Miss Dodds. Okay. Now it's this Alex Jimenez guy. Okay. At Start Effects. Before you know it, you'll see stuff like this, popping up in CBR and Screen Rant and Variety and, all the other, entertainment publications to try and sell the public that this show, okay, this abomination that Amazon has created, is somehow intrinsically linked to what Peter Jackson and Tolkien himself did. And I'll push back. And so if you wonder why sometimes you'll see me pull up an article, and you're like, dude, just talk about the lore or something else. But why I pull up these articles? That's why. Because I know how this works. I know how the media works. I know how they will try to control a narrative till it becomes the default in everybody's mind. And as a Tolkien fan, I'm willing to do what it takes to push back. And I'm hoping that other Tolkien fans are with me on this as we fight back. We saw what they did to the Star Wars fandoms. We saw what they did to the Star Trek and the Doctor Who and all, and the MCU and all these other fandoms, and how they came in there and threw lore out the window and rewrote the history of these beloved franchises to the point where the fans can hardly recognize them anymore. And I'm not willing to just sit back and quietly let that happen to Tolkien. So I'll call this shit out all day, every day. The more articles that the people like Ms. Dodds and Mr. Jimenez put out, the more video content I'll have to do where I rip into it. So anyway, I just want to let you know, because now you're seeing I just thought it was interesting because it's a video that here on this channel I literally talked about. Was it last week or the week before? And now you're already starting to see it be picked up by other journalists and put out there as like, oh, this is the de facto position. That old theory is an old theory. Let's forget that. Let's go with this new one because it's betterer. No, not in my book. Not in my book. And I'll call you on it. So anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. If you like the video, like the video. If you feel like sharing the video, please feel free to do so. And if you have not subscribed yet, I would hope that you would consider subscribing and joining the fight as we fight to defend everything Tolkien from the grubby hands of corporate machinations who care not for the work that the man did or the lore and just want to make a money-making machine out of it. So I would hope that you would consider subscribing. If you are a subscriber and are returning, thank you very much. And I will talk to you guys in the next one. Be good, be safe, be awesome. I'll see you soon.